As Ralph Waldo Emerson quoted, speech is power. Speech is to persuade. Speech to convert, to compel. It's to bring another out of his bad sense into your good sense. A very good afternoon, everyone. This is Arya Nair, student and PG scholar from the School of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences, Craiova University, signing up for the first day keynote session of the 2 days international multidisciplinary conferences on representation of violence in literature and media. It gives me immense pleasure to be a part of such an informative event and to welcome you all to be the part of the same. Without any further ado, I would like to take the privilege to welcome the moderator of today's session, Dr. Daniela Rogobeta. Daniela Rogobeta is a translator and an associate professor at the Department of British, American, and German Studies at University of Craiova, Romania, where she teaches English literature. She holds a PhD in post-colonial studies, and this continues to be her major field of study, with a particular focus on contemporary Indian literature written in English. Her most important publications include Scotland and Scottishness, From Tradition to Modernity, Deconstructing Silence, Ambiguity and Censored Metaphors in Salman Rushdie's Fiction, Metaphor Between Language and Thought, When Text Comes into Play, Intertext and Intertextuality, edited and co-edited collections of essays, The Partition of India, Beyond Improbable Lines, The Silent Life of Things, Reading and Representing Commodified Objecthood, Centers and Eccentricities Language, Literature and Cultural Policies, Cultural Identity Between Acceptance and Denial. Her articles are published in national and international journals. Her research interests also include intertextuality, aesthetics, and visual culture. Once again, a warm welcome to you, ma'am. Now, I would like to read the profile of our today's resource person, Ms. Alankrita Singh. Alankrita Singh is a qualitative researcher interested in intersections of gender, caste, and class with age. Her research analyzes how the complex intersectionalities position certain individuals and communities as targets of violence. She relies on her decade-long experience in law enforcement, particularly VAWC, to examine systematic response to such violence. She has published teaching cases on juvenile justice, child sexual abuse, domestic violence in a live-in relationship, and sexual harassment at the workplace for multiple stakeholders from judiciary, police, lawyers, NGOs, and media. In her master's in childhood studies at University College London, she examined how adult practitioners constructed the right to participation of children in contact with the system. Her dissertation thesis is titled Children's Right to Participation Begins When Adults Listen. As on 30th April 2023, she has successfully delivered the Media Archive project, published an online multilingual repository of 25,000 news reports from 3 focus countries. She has published a series of blogs on media representation of VAWC during the COVID pandemic based on content analysis of this data set. We are fortunate to have you, ma'am. Once again, I would like to welcome you to the international conference to share your thoughts and insights on the topic gender and juvenile justice. Now, I shall request Ms. Alankrita Singh to take over the session. The platform is all yours, ma'am.
Thank you so much for your kind words. So, Daniela, how do you propose we go about this? Let me know.
I think you can start the presentation. Yeah, I just for a couple of seconds, I take the opportunity to extend a warm welcome to all our colleagues and friends who chose to join us today on the second day of this very challenging and interesting academic event. I am deeply honored and happy to be here to meet you all. To meet you and to chair this particular session. And I have to thank Dr. Abhisarika Prajapati for the invitation. It is my great pleasure once again and honor to give the floor to you. So please, Ms. Alankrita Singh, share your thoughts on gender and juvenile justice with us.
Yeah, sure. So I'll also begin by thanking Abhisarika for this opportunity. And I can see there are more than 40 participants, and I guess the participants are students, researchers, scholars, and maybe some professors. I'm not sure. I do see a list of participants. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend the sessions that were conducted yesterday or today prior to my own session, but I'm sure those would have been very thought provoking. That is what I will try to do in my presentation, make certain propositions, share certain ideas and thoughts based on number one, my work experience in the law enforcement, and then number two, based on my small little academic journey of a couple of years of being in research, which includes my master's dissertation thesis and the media archive project that I've been working on for the past 7-8 months now. So I also would like to propose that I make my presentation for about 40 minutes from now, and Abhisarika or the moderator of the session, any one of you, please feel free to stop me. You know, having been a teacher or a trainer for 5 years, sometimes I do tend to go on and on. And of course, all of you are researchers. You will understand when you get an opportunity to talk about your own research, then hours just fly by. So do point out to me if I'm not keeping my time, but I will try to manage the time so I can go on for the next 40 minutes, and then would love to hear from all of you. I will be challenging some of you in my presentation with some ideas and notions, and the idea is to get your feedback, and just feel free to tell me that whatever I found in my research, you don't agree with that. Would love to hear all those voices who do not agree, and also those who agree. So yeah, let's get started. It was a journey for me to prepare this presentation, because I went back to a decade ago, my field experiences, my work experience, what I saw, and although all that is not rosy, all that is not pleasant to remember and to recall. So I've been through a roller coaster of emotions last few days preparing this presentation. So it's a summary of my professional journey as well as a personal journey. Why this topic of juvenile justice is close to my heart. Number one, I'm a mother of a boy. And number two, what I saw in my work experience inspired me to talk about this subject, which is not which I believe needs to be talked about more and more. So here is my presentation on gender and juvenile justice. Thank you, Abhisarika, for sharing your screen. We can go to the next slide now. So like I said, I'll begin with my own journey. So first of all, I'm going to talk about why I'm interested in the topic of juvenile justice. And it starts from my work experience. As a student, I did not know much about juvenile justice. However, it was one particular jail inspection, which I believe that it just changed the course of my career and my life. So there was, in a jail inspection, I was taken around a particular jail. And inside the jail, there are different barracks. And one of the barracks was called Bacha Barrack, or, most of you may know Hindi. For those who don't, Bacha would mean a child. So there was a separate barrack for children. And that scene is fresh in front of my eyes, where I'm walking through very long files or lines or queues of young boys standing inside the bacha barrack and holding cards in front of them. And on the card, it was their name, but what stood out for me was that most of those children, because they are less than 18, and in as per the law in our country, any person less than 18 is a child. So most of them were booked under very heinous sections of rape, and other forms of sexual assault. This was my first, so to say, face-to-face confrontation of the ground reality. And I when I probed further in this matter, I found out that most of them had actually just they had just fallen in love with girls who were less than 18 years old. So it is a legal offense in this country to have a sexual relationship with any girl less than 18 years old. Sorry, I don't see the presentation. So this was an eye opener for me, that I felt that day that are we criminalizing young boys for just being for just being adolescents, for just being children, for just loving, and that's why I quote Arundhati Roy here. Abhisarika, are you there? Do you all hear
Okay,
me?
got disconnected. Yes, yes,
Okay.
I connected.
All right.
Just give me
So never mind. So as soon as Abhisarika joins, she'll be able to put up the presentation. But I have my notes, so I can go on. So this is how one particular jail inspection got me interested in the subject of understanding why young boys are criminalized, how they are criminalized, how the laws play a role, how the sociology of our country plays a role, and how we can look at this issue from an intersectionality perspective. I will talk more about all these things in the course of the presentation. So this jail inspection was one. On the other hand, whenever the issue of children being criminalized was discussed, it was typically in the form of figures, statistics, and files. So many files of juveniles in 1 year, so many files in 1 month, how many disposed. So I really felt that real children who stood in front of me that day in that jail, those real people with personalities, with shades of life experience, with smiles on their face despite them being in jail. So all those children were just reduced to facts and figures and reduced to files when it came to the law enforcement agencies. And I'm talking specifically about police here, although the juvenile justice system in our country comprises policy makers who write the laws, like for example the JJ Act or the Juvenile Justice Act. And then it comprises magistrates, lawyers, and probation officers, as well as NGO workers who work directly with children. So this was my initiation into the area of juvenile justice. Next slide, please. Feel free to ask anything and stop me if you would like to at any point of time. Also, let me know if I'm going too fast. Some kind of law enforcement jargon comes naturally to me, and being a student from sociology of childhood, certain terms may just feel like second nature to me. But if you think that I'm using any jargon, please do let me know and just stop me and ask your questions. So I decided to dig further, probe further this issue, and I did this when I was doing my master's at University College in London. My master's was called Sociology of Childhood and Children's Rights, and in this master's program, I really got the language to communicate and to articulate the issues which were bubbling in my head, the issues that were troubling me. I really got the masters really gave me a lens to understand these issues and to then start thinking in terms of solutions to the social problems or issues. So I read Pratiksha Bakshi extensively. Her book, I've given many citations here. If any of you are interested in reading these research papers or these books, just you can email to me and I can send the list of all these citations to all of you. So Pratiksha Bakshi, in her book, using case studies, brings out that love is criminalized or penalized only when it is inconvenient. In one particular case, she tells the readers that when parents find out or discover that there is a love affair between two children, one boy and a girl in that particular case, and if the boy happens to be from lower caste or class, that is when their love becomes inconvenient for the adults in the society and in the family. And that is when the police get involved, and police also tend to police also tend to look at these cases with the same social lens from which the parents may be looking at this. So then, here we see a kind of a duality in the construction of two childhoods. I'm talking about two children who are in love. They are part of the same case or the same file, one boy and one girl. uh, However, they are both children and governed by the same laws in the country, but their childhoods are viewed very differently from each other. This is a very important point, and I would like to dwell on it a bit further. And at any point of time you want me to repeat or elaborate anything, do let me know. But I hope you will pay attention to this point. So, what I found from my literature review was that this duality of construction of two childhoods, this has been studied in all cultural contexts. So, it's not limited to India. This has been studied across the geographies. So, what I mean by dual construction is that the girl is typically seen with a protectionist lens. So she is somebody who can be a victim or is a victim, and she is therefore somebody who's vulnerable, who is naive, who needs to be protected. And this kind of view of girls who are constructed as victims, this kind of view actually legitimizes control and surveillance and supervision and policing of girls, because they are seen as potential victims. And this surveillance is done not only in homes but also in schools, in public places, in public policy. Now, what is wrong with protecting girls? There may be nothing wrong with protection per se, but when that protection comes at the cost of autonomy and agency of the girls, at the cost of their participation, then probably it crosses a particular boundary for me. So what I'm trying to say, that if safety of women and girls is an important issue, which it is, then only protectionist measures may be incomplete. However, it is the participation of the girls which will improve their safety and security. When their participation in homes, schools, public places increases, they get the power to participate in policy, for example. That is when the protectionist measures will be able to ensure their protection. So this is how girls are constructed, as victims, and as vulnerable and naive, and who need to be protected. On the other hand, the boy in the same case, also a child, is constructed as a criminal or a demon or a perpetrator. Now, this is also a very one-sided view of the boy, or the boy child in the file. I continue to use the term child because any person in our country less than 18 years of age is a child legally. So, what happens when boys are constructed as potential perpetrators? Then this kind of view that legitimizes punitive provisions, legal provisions, policing of younger boys, and this militates against principles of reform, principles of fresh start, and principle of best interest of the child, which are all enshrined in the law in our country for young people. So this is the basis of all of my research, that there is a duality of construction of two childhoods, even when those two children may be related to each other in the same case, but they are constructed very differently. By whom? By the parents, by society, by police, by lawmakers, and by even by media. So I hope that I have been able to clarify this point. If yes, then we can move on to the next slide. Uh, Please feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions about this. So, why does such social construction matter? I have done extensive literature review on this subject, and I have looked at what's happening in different countries across the world, including India. There is an increasing tendency in many countries towards prosecution of children as adults and in adult courts, and treating them at par with adults and giving them sentences that are meant for adults, rather than, this completely goes against the principle of juvenile justice, which means that there should be a completely separate system for children, which should be a child friendly system and which should be in accordance with the requirements of children. So, in India, post the Nirbhaya case, certain amendments were made in laws, and those amendments amounted to withdrawal of certain protections that were provided to children in conflict with law under our own law. So those amendments were made to make, which have made children more vulnerable to legal provisions and penal provisions. So, what's wrong with this is that the underlying social issues are not being addressed. However, there is only one aspect which is being addressed, which is the punitive approach towards children in conflict with law. And like I said, that there has been such a trend in many countries across the world, including the US. Next slide, please. So the intersectionality framework, all of you are academicians, you're already familiar with this concept, and this is largely being used for gender-based violence against women, and rightly so. In my research journey, I have used the intersectionality framework to look at children in conflict with law, specifically boys. So I have tried to examine how masculinities they intersect with in the case of India, how they intersect with caste and class and religion, etc., making certain boys and young people more vulnerable to police action, more vulnerable to being reported, more vulnerable to be arrested, to be detained for long hours, and also to be punished by courts. So I found that children in conflict with law, they are disproportionately comprised of Black and ethnic minorities, and in case of India, from disadvantaged castes and religious minorities. So again, this points to what Pratiksha Bakshi says, that when love is inconvenient, that is when law is used to penalize children, and that is when laws of love are broken. Next slide, please. Since this conference is about portrayal of violence in media and literature, I have already spoken about what literature says about portrayal of children in conflict with law. I will also talk about how media portrays children in conflict with law. And here also, I have looked at studies from across different countries. I have looked at studies from Canada, I've looked at studies from US, from the UK, and also from some South American countries. And I have seen or observed a particular trend which may be common across the different geographies. So, young people in general are portrayed negatively to a large extent in media. Now, why this is important? Because it doesn't only harm and stigmatize that particular specific individual who's being projected in the media. It harms youth in general. And then how does it harm the youth in general is the public opinion is shaped by what media writes about young people. And in case of India, I will talk more about it. Even policy may often be shaped by media portrayal of certain specific individuals or young people. What is interesting here is that actions of certain specific individuals, for example, what happened in the Nirbhaya case, and one of the accused persons in the Nirbhaya case happened to be someone less than 18 years old, so happened to be a child in conflict with law. So, individual acts of individual persons are used to form a narrative around young people in general and young boys and men in general. So this has been found across the board, and various authors, academicians have written on this subject. When it comes to specifically children in conflict with law, they are portrayed as criminals, as dangerous, and a fear psychosis is built around them. And here, the young people or men from racial, ethnic, and religious minorities are more likely to be demonized and criminalized by media. Now, this is very interesting that specific acts of specific individuals, how they, because media will choose events or incidents that are exceptional or extraordinary, as happened in the case of Nirbhaya rape and murder, and build a fear psychosis around young people. The same thing has been observed in the case of US, where isolated incidents of school shooting have been used, or isolated cases of any gruesome murder of rape or rape have been used to comment in general about young people and demonize the entire set of young people in general. Now, I came across this very interesting research done by Wilson, Hearn, and Abibi in 2020, and they said a very important thing in their research was that they spoke directly to children who were in child protection systems. So they were children in conflict with law, or they were orphaned children, children in care systems. So working with these children, they found that children saw themselves as very different from what media projected them as. So children saw themselves as good, they saw themselves as strong, they saw themselves as adaptable and communicative, and they did not think that other people perceived them in the same way as they saw themselves. I found this point very intriguing, that it makes sense then to go to the children and ask them how they perceive themselves and compare it with how media projects them or how the society views them in general. In the Nirbhaya gang rape case, there's this study done by Alamu, which says that the media got so swayed by the dramatic events that they just completely skewed the coverage, and in the process, they obscured uh, substantial legislative and legal issues. Yeah, I saw a question. Is it Shreya? Shreya, who's written this question? Can you please elaborate the innocence of the criminals of Nirbhaya? Yeah, so in my next slide, I am talking about this case study in more detail, and I hope to be able to answer this question there. But let me know if you have any further questions. So, yeah, let's move on. So, Alamu says that the media completely skewed the coverage of substantial legislative and legal issues. Those were not discussed. What was discussed largely in the media was that the crime was heinous, which it was beyond any doubts. And the media, in this particular case, on its own, decided to project one individual as the most gruesome, which my research says that it did not have substantial evidence to say that it was the juvenile who was the most gruesome of all. Okay, so let's look at this case in more detail. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I wrote this case study, Nirbhaya Rape and Murder, as part of my master's submissions. And, I'm happy to discuss with Abhisarika and others if you would like me to submit this for this conference or for publication later on. In my case study, my methodology was content analysis of media reports. I largely used reports from Business Standard and also looked at Alamu's study because Alamu had already done the groundwork of doing an extensive review of how media reported on the Nirbhaya case. And they had included regional media, local media, English media, but largely print media. So, based on this methodology, I reviewed a Nirbhaya rape and murder case, and I tried to reconstruct the perspective of the two key players in this case. So I tried to reconstruct the perspective of Nirbhaya based on news reports and the perspective of one of the accused who happened to be a child at the time of the incident. So why I used Business Standard reports largely because you would be surprised that I tried to find the perspective of the accused juvenile in the case in media reports. 99% of the media reports did not include the perspective in any form of the juvenile offender. However, to my mind, it is a principle that the media ought to follow, that they need to include all perspectives and present all perspectives in their reporting, at least make an attempt to reach out to all the key actors in a particular case. So, Business Standard, in their reporting, they were not able to reach out to the boy who was accused of rape and murder. However, they were able to reach out to his parents, and in some of their reports, I found the perspective of or some statements from his mother. While it was very easy to find the statements of Nirbhaya's mother, Nirbhaya's father, Nirbhaya's brothers, some of her friends, so all that was available in the media, easily accessible. However, it was a challenge for me to find anything from the perspective of the child accused in this case. So, two key findings from my research were that the media largely adopted a protectionist approach to safety of girls. And this is true of policymakers. So the post-Nirbhaya policy measures, they focused primarily on criminalization of various forms of gender-based violence. They focused on harsher penalties and they included death penalty. My critique says that the voices of girls themselves regarding how do they perceive their safety, what is it that they would like to see in terms of strengthening their security and their participation, their views, their thoughts, their ideas, their innovations, all this was completely missing from the narrative, and the narrative purely focused on legalization, criminalization of gender-based violence, and focused on harsher penalties. I am deducing this not only from media reports, but also from the extensive legal changes that were brought about soon after the Nirbhaya case. Then, second most important finding was that the media portrayed the child in conflict with law, who was one of the six people accused in the case, in demonizing terms. They demanded that he be treated at par with other accused people. So they demanded that the person be not treated as a child, but treated as an adult, just like the other accused persons in the case. So, based on this single case and with no participation from children in general or from children in conflict with law in particular, legal protections that were available to children in conflict with law were amended. And as they stand today, they are considered as not in line with the UNCRC. So, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, to which India is a signatory, Some of the amendments that were made post Nirbhaya case are being considered as violative of UNCRC provisions. Next slide, please. Okay. I'll continue with my findings from this case, and I found that media built a completely one-sided narrative. Media indulged in sensationalizing by using certain photographs, certain graphic descriptions of the crime, and also reconstructing certain scenes of the crime using animation. Then I also found that the voice of the child accused in this case was completely missing from the discourse. For example, many of us may not know where did the child come from, what was his background, where did he grow up. Many of us may not know that that particular child comes from a backward community in a rural area in probably Bihar, and that the child was compelled due to abject poverty to leave his house at the age of 12 and to take a bus to Delhi, and was not in touch with his parents for more than for a long time after this. Slept on streets for many nights, was abused himself, was himself a victim of sexual and physical abuse, and that he committed this crime in the company of five adults. One of them happened to be the master of this child. So, by master, I mean not just employer, but provider for this child for the last few years. So, this particular man had given shelter, who was the bus driver. The bus driver had given shelter to this boy for the last few years and used to pay some paltry amount to this boy for being a cleaner on the bus, etc. So many of these things, many of casual readers of this who followed this case, we are not aware of this. Then I found that the child in the child perpetrator was at the forefront all the time, but the child itself was dropped from the perpetrator, and we constructed him only as a perpetrator and not as a child. Then we constructed him only as a perpetrator, and we forgot that he was at some point of time he was also a victim in many ways. And we also saw that in the same case, Nirbhaya is constructed as a victim deserving of rights, and rightly so. She has rights, and her rights need to be respected. However, the child in conflict with law was constructed as someone not so deserving of rights, although he also was a victim, although in a very different way. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is my last slide, and I'm happy to see the time. I'm doing well, but before I come to this, I'm happy to take a few questions. I'm not sure if I have answered the question raised by. There was a question, yeah, Shreya. So Shreya, do you think I have answered your question, or do you have any further question here, or anybody else? All right, then I will go through the last slide. So yeah, please feel free to post your questions in the chat. Sometimes it's difficult to put on your mic and say it out loud. So just feel free to type it in the chat box. So with this background and with this literature review, my master's thesis focused on right to participation of children in conflict with law. So in my master's thesis, I looked at right to participation as enshrined in Article 12 of UNCRC, and it is an integral part of the juvenile justice law in India. And why right to participation? Because I feel that right to participation is probably a panacea for many violations violations of rights that happen with. Sorry, do you hear me? I think my network dropped.
We can
We
hear
can
you.
hear you.
All right, okay. It's Abhisarika's network again. Okay. So I was saying that I chose a right to participation because I believe that right to participation is probably one panacea for many violations of rights that happen with children in conflict with law when they are in police or judicial custody. So in my research, I did qualitative interviews of key stakeholders, or I like to call them duty holders. So I interviewed a judge, a lawyer, a police officer, and also people from NGOs who work directly with children in conflict with law. And my key finding in my research was that, which is also the title of my thesis, is that children's right to participation begins when adults listen to them. So the key word from my entire thesis, which stuck out very prominently from all my interviews, was the word listening. So the stakeholders told me that they would really like to listen to each and every child in conflict with law. However, there is time pressure, there are various kinds of stresses, and there are legal formalities. For example, a judge is supposed to be sitting on a high pedestal, and the children continue to be put in witness boxes like they are accused. Like adult accused, and because of these legal formalities they are not able to listen to children in conflict with law. So my most important finding was that children's right to participation begins when adults start to listen. Adults also face various barriers to listening by virtue of being adults. So we see even in families and schools that adults like to tell children what to do and how to do rather than listen to children. I don't know how many of you would agree with me, but my son tells me that I don't listen to him and I want him to listen to me all the time. So that's how children see adults, and adult practitioners also, those I interviewed, they also felt that as adults they faced barriers to listening because they felt that they were in a position to tell children what to do and how to do, while they were not in a position to listen to children what they thought was happening in their lives while they stood in conflict with law. This was the one most important finding. The other finding that I would like to talk about here, although I don't see my presentation, would be, yeah, it would be that when uh, that I found that adult practitioners see children's right to participation as a duty cast on them. For example, one of my interviewees in my research said that I want the children in conflict with law to participate, and I ask them to participate, but they don't open their mouth. So here I felt that practitioners often construct this as a duty imposed on children rather than as a duty imposed on the practitioners, to create such an environment where children feel safe to speak up and to share their thoughts. So I don't know, it's very difficult to imagine, but you can try to imagine that if there is a child who's less than 18 years old and suddenly comes in conflict with law, what would that child go through when that child cannot speak to their parents. The child is in the company of police officers and is in places like police stations, and so these places are often very very intimidating for children. They are all obviously very scared about what's going to happen to them. Of course, they've done something wrong, which they shouldn't have, but they have done it. Now, in such circumstances, they feel very intimidated, and they are obviously in a shock, and they do not have anybody close to them with them. They do not have anybody to advise them as to what should they do, and they are not able to trust people in authority. For example, police officers, lawyers, judges. It's not easy to trust strangers, and strangers who have so much power. So these duty holders have so much power in their pen that they can literally change the course of life of a child. They can literally pronounce a child an adult. They can literally write death sentence on people's files. So they have so much of power. In such power differential, it is not easy for any child to communicate or participate in the proceedings. So, in my research, I found that the onus is on adults to create such an environment where a child feels safe to express himself or herself, and to be able to share their thoughts and ideas, and to be able to trust adults who are in the position of power and authority. So these were my main findings, and I have also written down certain recommendations as to what we can do to further strengthen the right to participation of children in conflict with law. A question comes at a very good time because I'm almost done. Okay, so Neha says, what are your thoughts on perpetrators of crimes who have, in most, if not all cases, been victims themselves? Does it justify the crime, or should it give them a certain privilege before law? Shouldn't amnesty for children in conflict with law depend and vary after each testimony is seen for itself with its own grounds? Say a child of 12 versus a child of 17, etc. Is there any demarcation for the same at our policy levels or laws? So I'll try to break your question into two parts. And this is a very interesting question, Neha, or it says Nehad, because why I say that it's a very interesting question, because this actually is the crux of my research. This really is the crux of my research, or the dual construction of childhood. And what I have concluded after being engrossed in this topic for nearly 5 years or more than that, what I have concluded is that that rights of all the parties are important, and it is possible to balance rights of all the parties. It is absolutely possible, and the law enables us. This is coming from my experience of being in the law enforcement. The law enables us to balance the rights of all the parties involved. So there are some inalienable rights available to everyone accused of crime. Forget it, even if it's not a child, even if it's an adult, and any kind of crime they may be accused of a crime against humanity, or the most heinous thing that you can imagine. Yet, as human beings, they have certain inalienable rights. For example, a right to legal counsel. So, anyone who is facing the legal system must have the right to legal remedies, right to legal counsel. They must have the principles of natural justice, where their perspective or their side must be heard before a decision is taken. So these are certain inalienable rights that cannot be taken away from any individual, and it is possible to still do justice. And justice is an overall justice. Justice is not merely justice for the victim. Justice is justice in a case which treats everyone justly and fairly. So when you say that perpetrators of crime who have, in most if not all cases, been victims themselves, does it justify the crime, or should it give them a certain privilege before law? So no one should get a privilege before law, but everyone should get their legal due. So if the law in our country says that any child in conflict with law has the right to be heard, then that child must be heard. So any child in conflict with law should have legal representation, then that child should have legal representation. Any child in conflict with law cannot be given a death penalty, then that child cannot be given a death penalty. So it is possible to balance the rights of the child. So if cannot be given a death penalty, yet can be given life imprisonment, cannot be given life imprisonment as well, yet this is the maximum sentence that that child can be given. So if the judge considers that in that particular heinous crime, it is the maximum sentence that must be given, then that would be given. So a balance needs to be stricken. That is my view. shouldn't amnesty for children in conflict with law depend and vary after each testimony is seen for itself? Say a child of 12 versus a child of 17. So yes, in law, in India, the Indian Penal Code has a demarcation based on age. So as per Juvenile Justice Act, anybody under 18 is a child. However, as per Indian Penal Code, a child who's less than 12 years old cannot be penalized for most crimes. There is full and complete immunity for a child under 7 years. There's partial immunity for a child under 12 years. So those laws go side by side in our country. Ma'am, how can the right of participation be ensured for children who may be too young or lack understanding of the legal proceedings, or children with disabilities or from marginalized backgrounds in the juvenile justice process? Absolutely. Your question takes the point that I made to the next level. So children as a group, they are not a monolithic group, and like I talked about intersectionality. So within the group called children, there are children with disabilities, there are children from children from ethnic minorities, religious minorities, the children from scheduled castes, the children from lower classes. So it is a very diverse group, and different children may have different needs. And I think that you have actually made a good point that for a real for right of participation to be ensured in the real sense, these differences within children, they must be taken into account. But that is the ideal position, and the real position is very far from the ideal, but that is where we would aspire to go. Where I have seen cases of many children from South India, they getting lost and found somewhere in Varanasi, where people only speak Hindi, and this child doesn't understand Hindi. The law provides for an interpreter for that child while that child is dealing with the system. However, there are many challenges. The law does provide that, but at the ground level, those provisions haven't been made, and there are no funds available for doing all these things. So there are many challenges. Children with disabilities, again, they would need special assistance, which is often not available at the cutting edge level, like somewhere at a police station, etc. Okay. New messages. Okay. Thank you, Neha. Neha, if you would like to read my paper on this Nirbhaya case study, I'm happy to share it with you, because in a short presentation, there's only as much as I can share here. I'm really happy to share that with you. I can share my email ID with all of you. Just feel free to, or I would rather have Abhisarika share my email ID with all of you. And I can share my paper with you. Any other questions? It would be nice to hear some of your voices or see some of your faces. It will be really nice if you will be kind enough to do that.
Here I am. Very interesting talk, and we deeply thank you for this, Dr. Alankrita Singh. Thank you for this insight perspective that you offered on the juvenile justice system in India. But even for me, coming from Romania, I can say that I completely resonated with everything you said, and I can testify that the same things happen here. Especially in what concerns that double measure in assessing the cases, and when gender is involved. I think that the fact that you have this combined experience of a police officer, of a scholar, of a researcher, of a teacher and trainer, and most importantly, of a parent and of a mother, is extremely important, and offers, in my opinion, a higher degree of objectivity and empathy in this very complex and complicated problem.
It is very complicated. Absolutely.
I have a question too, if you allow me, and I'd like to go back to the problem of representation, more exactly to the ethics of representation. And I was really impressed to discover that you are also a photographer and an illustrator. And I'd like to ask you whether this expertise also helps you in increasing this degree of awareness, of people's awareness related to juvenile violence. And then, where would you position yourself? Because we all know we can't rely exclusively on what media give us. And then we also have literary text and photos and, well, works of art and so on and so forth. And since the juvenile justice system is, as far as I've read and as far as I've understood, so much focused upon prevention and reformation and rehabilitation. That means that making people aware of this, making parents and educators aware of this is something very important. So how do we actually talk about and represent violence without being accused of proliferating it and
Yes.
encouraging the youth towards violence? So there's this double trap, I should say, being too gruesome and too graphic in our description and representation of violence on the one hand, and then face the risk of being accused of, again, encouraging violence, or on the other hand, of being too soft, too mild, or probably too indirect. And in this case, we might be accused of aestheticizing and romanticizing violence. So where can we find that middle path?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, so the question that you've asked, I've been grappling with this, and I continue to grapple with this. But I think that I have clarity. I know which side I am on. I'm very clear about that. But to communicate what's on my mind, it's often tricky, because again, I would go back to the media portrayal of cases like the Nirbhaya case, and such cases have happened in the UK, have happened in the US, and there's been a similar trend of reporting. And such cases, and the way they are reported, they make this issue very emotive, and people have strong views about what should be done. There's often rhetoric and mm, I would say ill-informed, or a very shallow understanding of the issue. So when that is the case, then it gets difficult to communicate that everyone involved has rights. Even the most gruesome of criminals have rights, to whatever extent. But I am a you know having been in the police and having witnessed how human rights are differentially granted to people by the police. I am an ardent proponent of human rights, and within human rights, specifically children, because they are a very vulnerable group. My master's in sociology of childhood really gave me the clarity on this issue, that just as we talk of men as a gendered group that has advantages over women as a gendered group, similarly, the world is divided across age. So adults hold certain powers above children as a group. And this is, if you just we just accept it, this power differential. But if you are open to a small window in your mind that adults have power over children, then you can see it happening in your own family, you can see it happening in schools, you can see it happening in law and legal practice, and everywhere. It's just the first step of being open to the idea that adults have power over children. So when every adult, adults in general have power over children, even in families where there is love, there is bonding, then you can't imagine what form this power takes when children come in conflict with law. I have seen it with my own eyes. that, children not looking up and shivering and shaking and unable to say a word. Why should that child trust me? I'm somebody in uniform. Why would that child trust me unless I make that extra effort to convince the child that I'll be fair and I will listen to you? Why would that child trust me? So, and the last thought would be, yeah, that the most important takeaway as a photographer was that number one, my camera loves children. When I'm out on the streets shooting, I find myself naturally, gravitating towards children. And the other thing is that I observed early on as a photographer that, we are taller than children as adults. So we tend to look down on them all the time. Uh, and I would like pictures of children when I would kneel down and come to the level of the child and take a picture. I would encourage all of you to do this if you have children at home. Click their picture from the top, from your height and from their height, and another picture, come down to their height and click at their eye level. When you look at them at their eye level, that is when you're trying to give them a message that we are equal as human beings, and I respect you just as much I expect you to respect me. So as a photographer, I learned that we need to come to the level of children. Only then we will be able to understand what they're trying to tell us in their own ways. They're trying to tell us things all the time in their own ways. But as adults, we are closed. We don't listen to them. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Anyway, you're doing an excellent job in all these fields, photography included, because I saw some of your portraits. They were mostly women, but again, that's another face of India. Very beautiful and a very nice representation of Indian femininity. Congratulations for everything. If we have more questions and comments.
Thank you so much. It was really an insightful session, very interactive, very relevant and significant in our today's time, when we all are busy with our schedule, deadlines, timelines and all. And as mother, we also find it quite challenging every day, to deal with our own children in our family or familiar setting. And this session has really, given me personally a lot of understanding how to treat children, how to look at them, and how to open that window, which you pointed, Alankrita, was very, very significant to understand the power structure, which creates a kind of binary between adults and children. So it was truly insightful. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Dr. Daniela, for joining us, accepting our invitation.
Thank you too for having me here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to me. Thank you, Abhisarika.
Thank you so much. Since we have come to the conclusion of this session, I invite all the participants to enable their video. I have already given commands. So you can just appear on the screen so that we can freeze this moment quickly.
Wow, it'll be nice to see all of you.
Yeah.
Please do share this with me as well.
Sure, sure. Yes.
And with me as well.
Of course.
Thank you. Hey.
There you go. What more? Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you too.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Take care.
You too. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.